Hello again. In this lesson, we're going to look at another model related to the development of self-awareness or selfhood. This one, developed by George Mead. And I'd like for you to focus on information that you will find in your study guide down at the bottom of the 12th page and over on to the 13th page. Also, there is good supportive information in the text in Chapter 3. Mead's model or notion of the development of self-awareness revolves around the idea of creating an ideal self. Notice again at the bottom of the 12th page of your study guide exactly what's involved in that. This is the image that you and I develop in order to acquire love and approval. I don't know how important love and approval happens to be to you. I suspect if you're like me, it's very important. But initially, we don't really know what we need to do to be accepted, to be loved, to be approved. So we get a lot of insights when we're very young, according to Mead, from those that we hold in very high esteem. People we want to be like, we want to emulate. Collectively, he referred to these folks as significant others. They initially show us the ropes. And I want you to think more of, or at least beyond, just your parents. Who were some significant others in your life when you were young? It might have been other members of your family, an older sibling, grandparents. It could very well have been, again, if you attended daycare, a teacher at daycare that you strongly identified with. And by the way, these significant others don't have to be real live people. They may be imaginary heroes. For some of you, it might have been Supergirl. For the rest of you, or at least for some of you, it could have been Spider-Man or Batman, if you wish. It's entirely possible that supernatural figures played a role in your life and, again, functioned as significant others. God, Allah, Jesus, and the like. At the same time, maybe some of you were like me. You had an imaginary friend. But later, we began to internalize, make part of our very thinking and behavior, the values and the views of our community and our larger society. Now, collectively, this is what Mead meant when he referred to the generalized other. And for us to develop, again, the generalized other and respond to it, he argued we have to acquire a capacity, an ability, which he referred to as role taking. Role taking. Now, to kind of tie together everything that we've addressed here, I found this that you might find interesting. Mainly use it to become acquainted with certain key themes. Key ideas, if you wish. Now, role taking is an integral part of the whole process, and role taking implies that we literally, imaginatively become somebody else, and we view ourselves from that imagined position. We imagine ourselves in others' shoes, so to speak. And we see ourselves as that person does. Now, we'll elaborate on this as we go along, but what I'd really like for you to do is to take a look at the information you'll find at the top of the third page, the top of the 13th page of your third study guide. Here you'll see laid out in some detail the process through which and by which Mead argued that all of us develop this capacity for role taking. And notice, if you will, he suggested that it probably involves a series of stages. Now, this is a somewhat different way to look at the stages beyond what I have in the study guide. That preparatory stage can also be referred to as the imitation stage, if you will. And as you think about it and focus on it, remember it's going to start roughly from birth through second, third year of our lives. Okay? Now, going back to your study guide, in the preparatory stage, notice that children, again, tend to imitate the action of others. The self, according to Mead, isn't present. This is sort of an illustration. This young man is imitating the behavior of adults, as is this young man. But you want to remember again that children are only imitating. They are imitating the action of others that they hold in high esteem. I remember when my oldest son was that age, in the afternoons I would often read the newspaper, and he would sometimes pile up next to me, and as I discarded a sheet of the newspaper, he would sometimes pick it up, and then I can remember he would look up at me and then look at the piece of paper and do this. Now, he had no earthly idea what I was doing. He was just imitating my behavior. Now, sometime between 2 and 3, according to Mead, we enter into what's referred to as the play stage. And this might highlight it in some detail. It's here that you and I really pretend to be other people. We're beginning to get an edge, sort of a notion of what this process of role-taking entails or involves. In the play stage, the notion of the self is developing. A child takes on the role of another and tries to be that other. And this is a key thing that I want you to remember about this stage. Kids really get into the roles that they play during this stage. They try to become the character or the person that they are imitating. I remember again my oldest son, when he was in the age range I was talking about, roughly 3 to 5. And one of the things I want you to remember before I provide further illustration is during this stage, 3 to 5, the so-called play stage, bear in mind that kids, although they play roles, they're going to flip around and again play a multiplicity of roles in a given time frame. And I remember one afternoon when I was reading the newspaper in the living room, my oldest son came running through with a towel wrapped around his neck, and he was up and down all over the place. Couch, chairs, etc., making shoo, shoo noises. And then suddenly, as if he were in the middle of a sentence, he pulls off the towel and looks around and then puts his hand out in sort of this fashion and goes "Sst," and runs over and touches his hand all over the walls. And he does this for, again, 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm beginning to think, what the heck's going on? This is my kid. Is he crazy? And then suddenly, again, as if in the middle of a sentence, he jumps up on the end of the couch and goes, "Hi-yo, Silver, away!" And he does this for a few minutes, and I finally said, "Ross, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you came through with a towel wrapped around your neck." "Oh, I was Superman." And then it hit me. I said, "And then I guess you were right, Spider-Man?" "Yeah, Dad, yeah." "And then you became, am I guessing correctly, the Lone Ranger?" "Yeah." Well, this marks again the play stage. Now, sometime after 5, and it kind of varies. It could be as early as 5, as late as 7. Kids begin to play organized games. They enter into what Mead called the game stage. The game stage. Now, you want to remember, games are structured. They're organized. They involve multiple persons. and they're characterized by rules, and they have a specific end or purpose. And Mead highlighted, or at least he emphasized, that in play of games, children learn to follow the rules, that the position they occupy can be impacted by what is happening with those who occupy other positions. And they also begin to get some insights into role taking. They have to imaginatively take the role of all of those participating. Again, kids get a chance to imagine themselves in somebody else's shoes. They mentally begin to assume the perspective of another and then respond from that imagined point of view. That's an argument that McShonis makes. Now, at this stage, kids don't just play roles. They begin to consider a number of activities and relationships simultaneously. Kids have to understand not only their position, but those of others as well. Now, have you ever noticed how really young kids act when they first participate in organized games like this, soccer, or perhaps basketball, or baseball, as the case might be? Everything is really disorganized, big time way. I think you would probably agree with me, almost chaotic, because the kids haven't yet acquired the mental capacity to see how each role fits in with the other. So the ball rolls, everybody charges to it, and becomes a beehive effect. Eventually, however, kids who play organized games, like baseball, as is illustrated right here, again, what's important is they acquire the capacity to play roles that are simultaneously connected with many others at a given moment. A child has to be aware of how he or she fits in with other players on the team. At that point, he or she becomes a team player. For example, a baseball pitcher must be aware not only of his or her position and role requirements, but also the roles and the likely responses of every other player on the team, correct? And of the symbolic system of rules that guide the game. It is really through game experience, Mead argued, that kids not only acquire the capacity for role taking, but they also invoke the generalized other. They start taking into account their behavior, as well as the attitudes, the expectations, the values, and the viewpoints of the group, and eventually of the community and society. Why is it none of you is going to make your lifelong occupation stealing? Why is it most of you, most of the time, tend to be courteous? Well, all that figures into the generalized other. We learn that our society considers stealing to be inappropriate, wrong. Furthermore, we learn that courtesy is highly valued in our society. And that's reinforced through our parents, through faith leaders, employers, teachers, and the like. But eventually we buy into it. And we do it not because we feel we have to, but because we feel it's right, it's appropriate, it's what we should do. So in a way, the generalized other is you and I saying this: what I'm doing is good or bad, they would say. So again, during the game stage, the self is present. Children consider the roles of two or more people simultaneously. Now at the same time, don't take this too far, and you could. You might get the impression, is Mead saying we're completely controlled by others? Absolutely not. You want to bear in mind that Mead highlighted the fact that personality consists of two components, the I and the me. Now, the I is the spontaneous, creative aspects of who we are, independent of the social norms. It's a little bit like thinking without acting. It is the impulsive and basically unorganized part of ourselves. It's undirected, it's spontaneous in character, if you will. Okay? Now, what's important for you to bear in mind is that this is still very much a part of who we are. And you can see this highlighted, sorry that I messed this up a bit, on the 13th page of your third study guide. Remember, the I gives rise to behavior or actions without really considering the possible results or the consequences. It can be highlighted in the kind of, I want it now attitude and behavior of newborns and toddlers. You might think of one of my favorite characters on Sesame Street, Cookie Monster, grabbing and gobbling cookies at every opportunity. Cookie! Over time, children become increasingly influenced through their social interactions with others, who in turn instill the rules and the expectations of society. This gives rise or produces the second part of who we are, the me, according to Mead. The me is a socialized part of ourselves. It gives direction to actions, and particularly those actions that were initiated by the I. It channels the impulses of the I in an acceptable manner or way. That is, according to the rules and the constraints of society as best it can. For example, have you ever stopped before saying or doing something and said to yourself, maybe I better not do that. Maybe I better not say that. That's the me, monitoring, so to speak, monitoring and controlling your behavior. But don't underestimate the I. It continues to be a part of who we are. Maybe you've had some experience with this, where it's the night before a big exam, and all of your friends show up with a cake and 5 or 6 giant pizzas, and they want a party hardy. And you tell them, thanks friends, I really appreciate that, but I've got this killer exam tomorrow, and I've got to do well. That's the me influencing your thinking. On the other hand, and let's say it's an exam in sociology, you go, sociology sucks. I want to have a good time. Let's party, dudes. And you throw all caution to the wind and you forget about the exam. That's the I predominating. You and I, again, are an interesting combination of these two elements. Until next time.